Good evening, everybody. Excellent. Right, good evening. I think we're ready to start. I am Councillor Stuart Jeffrey, possibly the last ever leader of Maidstone Borough Council, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this meeting of the Cabinet. May I take this opportunity to advise you that if the fire alarm does sound, please remain seated and members of the Democratic Services team will assess the situation and give further instructions on the evacuation of the building if necessary. Tonight's proceedings will be webcast by the Council, but if anyone else is intending to record these proceedings, can you please let me know now? I asked this question merely not to stop you, but to merely ensure members and members of the public in the room know that this is taking place. I can't see anybody indicating, so there's recording. Oh, we've got somebody recording, of course. How exciting. Apologies for absence. I see a full house. I'm guessing no apologies for absence. Item 2 is urgent items. There are no urgent items, but I intend to take item 24, the Maidstone Local Cycling and Walking Infrastructure Plan, after item 16, so that we can, because we're going to defer that. Item 3, notification of visiting members. We have some visiting members. It's a good evening. Would you like to come up and let me know who you are and which item you want to speak at?
Councillor Greenan here to speak on item 17. Thank you.
Councillor Sweetman, I'm here to speak on item 17.
Councillor Cleater, item 17, and I reserve my right to speak on 25, sustainability of the community larders.
Councillor Rodwell, item 17, please.
Councillor Keeley, no specific item. I have a question, but I reserve my right to speak on item 17. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay. Have we got more? Oh, Hilary.
Yeah. Councillor Jenkins-Baldock to speak on item 17. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. Right. Item 4, disclosures by members and officers. Are there any disclosures by members and officers? Nope. Lovely. Item 5, disclosures of lobbying. Are there disclosures of lobbying? Councillor Cox.
I've been lobbied on item 20.
Oh yes, I've been up on item 20 as well. Good point. I think we all were, weren't we? Yes, good point. Councillor Thompson.
I have been lobbied on item 17.
Yeah. And Councillor Summersgill.
Yeah, item 17 and 20.
Lovely. Okay. Item 6, consider whether any item should be taken in private because of possible disclosure of exempt items, information. I move that all items be taken in public. However, if members wish to discuss information contained within the exempt appendices to item 25, future sustainability of community larders, it will be necessary to move to a closed session due to the likely disclosure of exempt information for the reasons specified having applied the public interest test. Is this agreed? Item 7, minutes of the meeting of 20th of November. I move that the minutes of the meeting of 20th of November 24 be approved and as a correct record and signed. Is this agreed? Item 8, presentation of petitions. There are no petitions this evening. Item 9, questions from local residents to the leader or individual cabinet member. I have received notification that Sean Turner wishes to ask me a question. Sean.
Good evening. Season's greetings to everybody. Considering the recent press release in the Kent Online about a signed letter from 12 Kent districts, including Maidstone Borough Council, to Mrs. Rayner welcoming devolution, and Kent County Council's Freedom Information response stating there are no specific training programmes in KCC for levelling up or devolution, significant concerns arise about the lack of preparation and clarity surrounding this deal. Question: will Maidstone Borough Council commit to publishing a comprehensive, publicly accessible impact assessment of the proposed devolution deal, including its financial, administrative and democratic implications, providing clear evidence of public consultation showing how residents' feedback has been collected and incorporated to ensure transparency and accountability before any agreements are made?
Thank you, Mr. Turner. A white paper on devolution has been produced by the government, and that was published on Monday. This sets out their plans for devolution and local government reorganisation. As proposals are confirmed, information will be made public, including on consultation and engagement. This is a government-led initiative. The local decision makers are top-tier authorities, not lower-tier authorities, statutory. So we will work with whatever we've got, and we will publish stuff as and when we find out, and it's appropriate to do so.
Thank
Do
you.
you have a supplementary question arising from your original question or the reply?
I do.
Okay.
So devolution risks diminishing Maidstone Borough Council's ability to make independent decisions in the best interests of its residents, while centralising power in regional structures that lack local representation. To avoid sacrificing local democracy, how will the council guarantee that public assets, such as land and historic sites, remain under local control, including that residents are fully informed of and consulted on the outcomes of any accepted devolution deal?
Thank you. So your assessment of the risks and impacts accords with mine. In terms of how we will achieve those things, clearly we will continue to act in the best interests of the people of this borough. The answers are not yet there. You may recall from the last council meeting, there was a suggestion that Maidstone needs a town council, for example. So, and I know that much of the discussion about the loss of local direct democracy that we have at a more granular level that will be lost as a result of the changes that are coming, has centred around making sure that there are lower, third tier, fourth tier, there'll be fourth tier, won't they? Parishes and town councils are across the board. So hopefully we'll start to work on whether that's possible or not, because clearly democracy is important to us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. So item 10 then. Yeah. Item 10 is questions from members to the leader or individual. I've received notification of 4 questions to members. The first one I received was from Councillor Keeley, who wishes to ask a question of Councillor Cox, Cabinet Member for Resources, Corporate Resources. Councillor Keeley.
Apologies, thought I had. The only mandatory training for members is with regards to planning and licensing. Can the Cabinet member advise what training is mandatory for Maidstone Borough Council staff and explain why all council members aren't currently required to complete basic training such as equality and diversity that complies with government legislation, and in this case, the Equality Act of 2010?
Thank you, Councillor Kahili. And thank you for your question. So member training is critical to ensure councillors have the appropriate skills for their committees and other roles undertaken. However, as councillors are not employees but elected representatives, they're not subject to the same requirements as staff. Training on licensing and planning for those committee members was formally agreed by council and is set out in the council constitution, with a caveat that if training is not undertaken by a set date, members will cease to be a member of that committee. Democracy and General Purposes Committee have responsibility for member training and development and review this annually. This year's programme will include equality, diversity and inclusion training, inclusivity training, and a workshop has been organised for the evening of the 7th of April for all councillors. The training will be adapted from that planned for staff in the new year. As well as training commissioned by the council, we also encourage councillors to take advantage of the resources and training provided by the Local Government Association. And council employees have access to in-person training and online training modules, which include mandatory activities and training for growth and development. When new employees join the authority, they're expected to complete learning within the first 6 months, covering health and safety, manual handling, office safety, safeguarding, Prevent and the Equalities Act 2010. So as I said, all staff will be undertaking training on equality, diversity and inclusion online and in person in February and March next year, and officers in April next year.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. If I could just add, I'm really keen that we extend EDI training not just to councillors on this borough, but also to parish councillors as well, particularly given the appalling racist statement that was circulated a few weeks ago. I really do think that that is absolutely necessary. Do you have a supplementary question arising from the answer or your original question?
Thank you, I do. So we had an email sent at 12 minutes past 2 today informing us about this EDI training. So can you confirm if this is going to be mandatory? Because given the situation we've got and the things we're talking about with VORG at the moment, I think that it's something that all council members should do because it reflects on what's going ahead, and also whether there's going to be any training around the Worker Protection Act of 2023, which covers sexual harassment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kahili. I'd certainly like to see it mandatory, although it's hard to enforce. And actually, the view is that that should be enforced by each of the group leaders of their members within their remit.
Thank you. I think one thing we should be able to do is to at least publish the proportions of each group that have taken the training. I think that's it should be known by the public who's done the training. Thank you. I've received notification that Councillor Rodwell wishes to ask a question of Councillor Nagy, Cabinet Member for Community Cohesion and Safety. Councillor Rodwell.
Thank you. Following the excellent debates at the Housing and Community Cohesion Pack last week on the motion supporting a more robust implementation within the council towards preventing violence against women and girls, one of the recommendations from the chair was to ensure that women with lived experience of this should have a central role in helping to develop this. May I ask what steps will you take to ensure this does happen so that decisions are not taken without consulting those in our community who are directly impacted?
Thank you for your question, Councillor Rodwell. Following the meeting, the Cabinet has included holding a Citizens' Assembly to our year one action plan for the new corporate strategy, with violence against women and girls being first area of engagement. Officers are aware of the need to engage those with lived experience as plans are developed and have committed to do this. The community protection team undertake regular events to engage directly with the community, for example, walk and talks and sessions in the 326 youth service space with young women focused on safety.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank
Councillor Rodwell, do you have a supplementary question rising out of your original question or the reply?
No, no supplementary. Thank you.
Excellent. I've received notification that Councillor Cooch wishes to ask a question of Councillor Nagy. Councillor Cooch.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. Question to the portfolio holder for community cohesion and safety. The report highlights the excellent work of the Safer Maidstone Partnership and the recognition of VAWG as a key local issue. What can I ask what specific steps the council will take beyond the current initiatives to fully commit to this motion, specifically including whether there will be a funding allocation and how departmental activities will be adapted to support the action points? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nagy.
Thank you, Councillor Gooch. Hopefully I said that right. The report tonight sets out the next steps we will be taking. Some steps have budget implications, and these will be reported to policy advisory committees and Cabinet by topic as per section 4 of the report. As I advised in my last answer, the Cabinet have now allocated new resource to the engagement in our upcoming budget and corporate strategy to ensure we listen to those with lived experience. There may be recommendations coming forward from those conservations and will require a resource, and this will be dealt with as decisions are taken forward. Decisions of Cabinet are published, and I would be happy to write to members to set out the next steps we will be taking.
Thank you, Councillor Nagy. Councillor Cooch, do you wish to ask a supplementary question arising from the reply or your original question?
No, thank you.
Thank you. I've received notification that Councillor Thompson wishes to ask a question of me. Whilst this is a little unusual, I believe this question is being asked on behalf of Councillor Cooch. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. On Councillor Cooch's behalf, because we are each allowed one question per meeting. I welcome the important points that Councillor Jenkins-Baldock brought to full council recently. It would have been helpful to have heard more discussion and development of those ideas at the time from all members. There are some actions that are within the day-to-day responsibilities of the council, and although other actions are not within this remit, we have a responsibility to be a leading and influencing organisation on this topic. Would the leader please describe what partnerships Maidstone Borough Council can set up or develop to bring greater positive influence to the town and borough to ensure that the safety, well-being and thriving of women and girls are significantly enhanced and maintained, and ensure that this is recognised as a responsibility for everyone, including our fellow councillors? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson-Cooch. So I'm going to take this in two parts because I think there were two parts. I mean, in terms of the lack of discussion at the full council, I must say I was deeply frustrated and angry at the lack of ability for voices to be heard. So I'm very pleased that we've been able to get this topic and through the pack and to Cabinet early. And I have expressed my concerns to the Mayor on that. In terms of the second part of the question, the schemes and so forth, I think we've probably answered that in both the papers and the previous questions, so I'm not sure I've got much more to add, I'm afraid. So Councillor Thompson/Cooch, do you wish to speak? I just wish to ask a supplementary question arising from your original or the reply. Thank you both. I should probably get in trouble for mucking the rules around a bit there. Item 11. Matters referred to the Cabinet by another committee for reconsideration. There are none. Item 12 issues arising from overview and scrutiny, there are none. 13 matters referred to Cabinet by another committee, there are none. 14 matters relating to a serious service failure or nuisance, there are none. 15 receipt of written representations from members of the council, there are none. Item 16, the Cabinet forward plan. Do members have any comments on the forward plan? Councillor Wales.
Just spotted page 13, Coventry Manor Estate. Lead member says leader of the council, but it's I who chair the committee.
Thank you. Jordan's noted that. The air quality monitoring report isn't on here. I've asked for that to go on as well. It always runs about 6 to 8, 10 months behind the year, so it's probably the 2023 monitoring report. So I've asked for that to be added so we can take that through PAC and see it at Cabinet. Any other, Councillor Cox?
Thank you, Chair. Page 16, Maidstone House and link decarbonisation. There's been a slight update today that we have an opportunity to defer the date of decision until February, in which we can incorporate some of the possible changes around the heating system in a report to Cabinet then, as opposed to hearing it in January without that update. So yeah, just giving you that information.
Thank you. Okay, we can pick that up. That's fine. Okay, I can't see anyone else indicating. Is that forward plan noted? Good. Somebody going to say yes. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, councillors. Right. We've brought item 24 forward, the Maidstone Local Cycling Walking Infrastructure Programme plan. And we brought that forward because I intend to defer this to the next Cabinet meeting in January, following the discussion at the PAC meeting. We would like to do more work on it. We haven't had sufficient time between PAC and now to even really think much about it. So because it was only a few days, wasn't it? So is that are people happy with that? Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chair. Agreed. And it will give us the opportunity to actually talk to other stakeholders, namely Kent County Council, about the way forward that was discussed at the Policy Advisory Committee, to have a far more focused document. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so item 17, the Comprehensive Strategy for Reducing Violence Against Women and Girls. Progress, proposals and pathways forward. Councillor Nagy, you are introducing this. I have 6 members wishing to speak on it. So once you've introduced it, I will bring the members up.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to thank Councillor Jenkins Baldock for putting the motion to Council, which then triggered this report to Cabinet. I'd also like to thank the Housing and Community Cohesion Policy Advisory for a positive debate, and to those members who gave such powerful and personal testimonies. We identify some key points to incorporate into our recommendations. 1, we work to ensure we value lived experiences, ensuring women and girls can share their experiences and engage with the development of plans going forward. 2, we will also look to engage male ambassadors, ensuring that more men play a role in understanding the concerns and in addressing behaviour of other boys and men. The sentiments shared at the PAC meeting last week were powerful, highlighting the need for women to have a voice and confidence in the services meant to support them. The issues transcends demographics and politics. It's all about fundamental rights. This is a crucial topic, and as detailed in the report, the motion is supported. Key recommendations is to ensure the relevant services progress plans through the appropriate process, so that consideration can be given to existing processes and any resourcing considerations. It's also recommended to both acknowledge and encourage the Safer Maidstone Partnership to continue cohabitating. Got trouble with that word tonight. And to ensure violence against women and girls sits prominently in their upcoming 3-year CSP plan. I'm happy alongside officers to take any questions or provide clarification where needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nagy. I'm going to call visiting members to speak next. I'd quite like to start with Councillor Jenkins-Baldock, if I may, as you propose the motion, and then I'll go to Councillor Greenan, and then I'll work along the row.
Thank you, Chair. I don't want to really repeat what I said at the full council meeting a couple of weeks ago, but I just want to underline a few key points. So as has been said multiple times this evening, I think it's really, really important that we are consulted with regard to any actions to improve our safety. So essentially, no decisions should be made about us without us. And that much more emphasis is placed on preventing violence against women and girls in terms of challenging attitudes and behaviours, because if we don't have that, nothing will change and we'll still be in the same situation in decades to come. It's about challenging those attitudes and behaviours that are problematic and that cause this situation for us in the first place. The other thing, that's what really needs to be challenged. We need to really change our mentality in terms of not just putting the onus on women again to ensure our own personal safety. We have to do more. We have to do more than that. And finally, just to say that I really hope that Maidstone Borough Council is ambitious in the actions that it takes for all women and girls in the borough. Thank you.
Councillor Jenkins-Baldock. Councillor Greenan, would you like to come and speak?
Thank you. I came here this evening not to speak about myself, but to represent two different groups of residents within my ward. In the summer, I spoke to a group of women who informed me that although they were aware of cases of violence against women within their community, due to cultural taboos and fear of bringing shame on their community, this still goes unreported. I want to ensure that any future plans involve these women, and then we consult with them on plans going ahead. The other group of residents I'd like to represent, a group of residents living around Trinity Foyer and Marsham Street. Over the summer, they experienced quite high levels of violence in their area, including a woman being punched in the face, having a bank card taken away so that somebody could use it to buy alcohol. They witnessed a woman begging and screaming for help, standing outside number 1 Marsham Street, with sounds of her being beaten up by a violent male resident. There have been concerns by these residents that people are being put there without a full risk assessment, and we are in fact putting women in danger and facing future violence. I want to ensure this is seriously addressed with any plans going ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Greenan. Councillor Cleater.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. I think Councillor Jenkins-Baldock and Councillor Greenan have made very valid points here of that we need to work not just as Maidstone Borough Council with what we're doing, but we're going to have to link in with other stakeholders and bring them on board. Now, where it's Kent County Council, hopefully shouldn't be a problem because they hold white ribbon accreditation. So I'm sure that they will want to engage with us. The other issue is the level of aggression and violence, as Councillor Greenan has said, within the town centre. We need to be dealing with that more. I've witnessed it on more than one occasion. In fact, Councillor English and Councillor Thompson were with me one night when we witnessed a woman being beaten up outside this town hall. And it wasn't that late at night, to be quite honest. So I think whatever we have in our strategy, whatever work we do, we need to be going round and checking that it isn't just a policy that's going to sit on a shelf. It is a living, breathing document that everyone is signed up to, elected members, officers, and anyone else that we deal with, whether it's third-party contractors, because they will probably see a lot out, for example, when they're doing the refuse collection, when we've got people in our team going out doing street collection. We need everyone signed up to this. The other issue, and again, we're going to need to work with academies and we're going to need to work with local schools, is getting that education, not just into secondary schools, but into primary schools, because some of the behaviours are being learned at home. We have seen also, and this will require liaison with our MP, or two MPs that cover this area, Helen Whately and Helen Grant, is that at the moment, if someone under the age of 16 commits domestic violence, it's not classed as domestic violence. And we've seen that tragic case where a young girl was murdered by a 16-year-old boy. And that element, her family are calling just for what we're calling for: better training, better recognition. A lot of these young girls don't recognise when they're in an abusive relationship, and that's why education of girls, which is taking place, needs to carry forward. But we need to educate young boys and men to be advocates as well, and have the confidence to challenge those behaviours, whether it's in school, youth clubs, churches, temples, mosques, wherever people gather. So for me, this needs to be a living, breathing document. It needs to be built from people who have lived experience. And again, as I've mentioned before, I find it really, really sad that a woman of my age is not seeing much improvement. And unless we get that close cooperating working, this isn't going to be resolved. We will be watching, the women on this council will be watching, the women in the community will be watching, and we as an authority, we will employ people who are suffering domestic violence. That is a given. It may be hidden, but we will. We as an authority need to ensure that we're offering our support wherever we are. And I would welcome regular reports back to the PACs and to Cabinet on the progress of this, because we will be watching, and if we don't see action, then we will be back here again. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cleater. Councillor Sweetman, I think you're next along the line. Microphone.
Good evening. That's better, isn't it? Yeah, can hear me. A post popped up on social media the other day, a Christmas advert from eons ago. Buy a Hoover and she will feel cherished. This was from a time when misogyny was endured by many women. As a society, we've moved on. Women are considered equal to men. We should feel safe from predatory males. Women should feel they have a voice and will be listened to, especially when they fall victim to abuse from men, however small it might be. Catcalling is not acceptable, and it should not be seen as a compliment, as some might suggest. It is intimidating and derogatory. Women are being attacked, abused and raped every day. Women cannot even enjoy a night out without fear of having their drink spiked. She may be behaving extremely drunk, but in reality, she has had her drink spiked. Keep her safe. Don't just get security to remove her from the premises. I hear it all too frequently that young women are asking for it due to the way they dress. No woman should be judged in this way. It is never a woman's fault. After all, men can go around in the summer with their shirts off and their jeans slung low. Keep women safe. No means no, and we mean it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sweetman. Councillor Rodwell.
I'll be very brief because Mo said it all really. I want to echo what she said about getting into the schools, starting young, starting in primary school age, working with young children, the way they perceive and the way they think about others. I work with very young children, and from a very, very early age, There are already these set ideas that men do this, girls do this, boys do this, girls do this, and it's black and white. So the fact that we really do need to be getting into the schools, we need to be working as young as we can, and working with our older children. I worked for many years with positive relationships when I was working for Choices Domestic Abuse Services, and working with both girls and also with teenage boys. And these were girls that were at risk of being groomed, or they were at risk of getting into abusive relationships. But once we started exploring what was happening for them, they were already in them, and they had already been in them for a while. And speaking with the boys, speaking with the teenage boys, again, there were these assumptions that this is what girls want, this is what girls like. Lots of young people accessing porn and expecting girls to be in a relationship with them. They have to be a certain way and do certain things. So there's masses to actually get hold of here. So really, it was just to echo this, that we need to be in the schools, we need to be working with the children, we need to be working with families, we need to be supporting families as well with how they are supporting their children. Because quite often there's a thread running through when you're working with girls, we're working with boys. Quite often there are things that have been happening historically with the families as well. So it's how can we get that support, so we know that these lived experiences are actively worked with, and they actually help us support what we need to be doing as a council. Thank
you, Councillor Rodwell. Councillor Keeley.
Thank you. This is probably going on from my earlier question, but I think it's so very, very important that we really consider as elected members that we lead by example, and that we all use terms that are appropriate and acceptable. We all know that children, young people emulate their elders, people they respect, people they esteem, which is how it should be. If we are using words that are harmful, that insidious drip, 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 that her skirt's too short, her skirt's too tight, her top's too low, she wasn't asking for it, but the rebuttal has got to be a rebuttal, it's got to stop. The words that we choose to use are the words that reinforce all the stereotypes that we've grown up with, that I've grown up with. And there's silver in my hair now. And I thought I don't get catcalled very often unless they're probably short-sighted, but I don't get it anymore. I'm not glad I don't get it anymore, because it's my daughter that will get this. It's my granddaughter that will get this. And this pain and this shame that we have felt over the years, not an innocent, you look nice today, love, the ones that are about words that I'm probably not going to say here, but the words that we get called are completely unpleasant, completely vile. And if they were reversed, that's wrong as well. I don't want this to be completely one way, or for us to think that other people don't suffer, but men suffer, but they do. But this is about women. And I just want to close with something, because mine is about words and about how we move forward, leading by example. And I went to see an exhibition on Friday with my daughter, and it was an exhibition about Marilyn Monroe. So she's the typical sexy blonde bombshell, absolute sex symbol. Everybody knows her for that. She was also really into reading, poetry, philosophy. She was also did an awful lot for race relations. She did a lot for sexual equality, as in sexual practice equality. She stood up for her friends who were people of colour. She stood up for her friends who were homosexual. And one of the quotes that ended this exhibition was, "One of the best things that ever happened to me is that I'm a woman." That's the way all females should feel. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Keeley. Thank you all for your giving up some of your evening and giving us your voices tonight. It is extremely important. I was at the Safer Maidstone workshop about 3 weeks ago. This was the topic that ran through that workshop. And I've seen lots of hands. I'll bring you in a second. I'm quite conscious that the Cabinet is largely male, and and I want to say that it is men that are the problem, and as men, we absolutely need to do everything in our power to up our game and to take responsibility, as was pointed out by I think all of you this evening. So thank you. Right, who did I have first? I did see. I'm going to bring Councillor Nagy in first as his portfolio holder, then Councillor English, and then Councillor Harwood.
Leader. I just wanted to mention that a private members bill got put forward. I saw it on the television. One of the new MPs has asked for a new offence to be created of domestic violence, GBH. So it's not just gone in with GBH or all those sort of things. It will be domestic violence, GBH. So when it comes to releasing prisoners, they will see it's domestic violence, GBH, and needs to be thought of a bit more on who they're releasing, rather than just in the mainstream. And I thought that was quite positive, and hopefully that will go through sooner than later. But to have something that actually reminds people that it's domestic violence, GBH, and not in the round with all the other GBH. And I thought that was quite a positive bit of news, especially with this week. Thank you.
Councillor English.
Yes, I think this very important subject, I suppose, falls into some different phases. The long term, the situation will not be completely resolved until we do something about the fundamental fact that violence comes from people who feel entitled because they have a dominant role or a perceived dominant role in society and the power that goes with it. And people, human beings, men or women, tend to abuse power unless there are consequences for that abuse of that power. So that brings us to what we do before the social and educational changes that work their way through. This council has to make sure with its partner agencies that people, usually men, who abuse their power in this situation will not feel that they can do so without consequence for those actions. And that when they do act in this appalling manner, the council and our partners in community safety and the police will come down on them like a ton of bricks. And that is what we have to do, because the educational processes and the changes in society sadly will take time to work through. But there are women in danger now, as Councillor Cleater referred to. Councillor Thompson and I saw a violent incident taking place in a not particularly isolated and a not particularly badly lit and a not particularly late Jubilee Square, where you would have thought people might have been a little cautious because it's happening in front of a large number of people. So we have to make sure that people do not act with a sense of impunity and the sense that they can get away with this sort of thing. So that brings us to a comprehensive strategy for dealing with violent offenders and offences against women. That isn't to say that the council and its partners haven't been doing anything. There have been quite a lot of initiatives going on, some of them very valuable, including, for example, a piece of work I was involved in around railway station safety audits with the Rotary Club, Dawn Patrol Rotary Club, and the Domestic Violence Forum. So there's all sorts of things going on. But what this strategy should do is bring that work together so that all the agencies are fully informed and cooperating, and the maximum effort is being put in, not least with the maximum publicity for that effort, because I know it's a strange parallel, but like with environmental waste crime enforcement, people will be deterred from a certain number of actions if they know that actions is likely to follow and punishment will follow. Unfortunately, a lot of these people will not be deterred unless they feel that they will suffer consequences for their action. That means that we, I think, need to start with checking that some of our current actions are actually happening. I mean, I know I've mentioned this before, but I was a bit disturbed by the national research that was done on the effectiveness of the hospitality industry in actually dealing with the Ask Angela campaign in public houses. So we need to make sure that what we are doing is fit for purpose. But there is a huge amount that we need to do in addition to that. And if that takes resources and extra money, which it will, then the council is morally obliged to take action to find that money, because people's lives and people's health, women's lives and health, girls' lives and health are fundamental to a civilized society. And we can't call ourselves such if we just don't deal with this issue properly. As a member for High Street Ward, I'm very much aware of some of the things that Councillor Brennan has referred to and the need to take action. I have to thank John Littlemore and Mr. Cornell for some of the interventions that have already had some effect there, but there is a lot more we can do as a council and need to do. So I hope that we will be able to move forward with some really positive and well-funded actions with our.
Thank you, Councillor English. Hopefully we'll get you a new microphone as well. Councillor Harwood and then Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Chair. It's absolutely damning that the most dangerous environment for women and girls is their own home. And I think that really needs to be understood. And the reason why that is important is because we are the housing authority. We are the homelessness authority. We also know that women and girls who are subject to abuse in the home, it usually takes 7 attempts before they can successfully leave. And it's a process, not an event. And where children involved is even more difficult. And we know the pressures upon our homelessness function. We know the challenges that are faced. We know that we do not have the kind of the women's refuges and so on that historically we had. The first women's refuge in Maidstone Borough was actually in my ward, you know, back in the early 90s, and I sat on the board of the refuge. And it has to be said, frankly, that there was some less than compassionate response and attitudes shown by some individuals who should know better. And this really concerns me because I think it is those social attitudes and mores which are the problem here. Because I actually think that when I was a teenager, it was less socially acceptable to be misogynistic and hateful to women than it is now. You would not see the kind of attitudes on show, the language and the feigning, the fainting, punching and so on that you see every day amongst youngsters of school age and so on. And frankly, I think that situation has come about because of social media and because of so-called influencers, and it has set us back a very long way. And Councillor Cleater, she talks about the fact that yes, this needs to be multi-agency because there's all sorts of contributing factors, some of them very sensitive around culture and class and poverty and so on, that we must address and tackle. But other components are just as difficult, and we need to, as I say, really get under the skin of the issue, and to do that it needs to be truly corporate. So we need to think about the housing function. I mean, in my ward, the last couple of weeks, I've had some really demeaning sexist graffiti put up on main thoroughfares, and our colleagues within the cleansing team have been superb at getting it removed very quickly. But I think it just shows that the multifaceted levels at which kind of hate and misogyny is demonstrated. So I think we need to be careful about just badging this as community safety. I think we need to think about it as a corporate ambition. And I know that the teams are dealing with this and are acting upon it, but you only need to see the levels of kind of violence that are out there, and you know, and frankly, you know, my family's been touched by violence against girls by former partners, and you know, we need to put our money where our mouth is, and it requires resourcing, and it requires the appropriate kind of amount of investment. So what I hope is that when we get the full reports and documents back, that it is truly holistic across the authority, and also where we do through the community reach have influence on things like alcohol and substance misuse and so on, which are other significant contributory factors, that again we link that into that kind of safe house place of refuge that we can support that work with. No, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harwood. Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Chair. So first, I just really want to commend all of our wonderful colleagues here who've made the effort and actually taken a very big step and a brave step to raise this so important issue. I'm just super proud of you all for doing that, and absolutely in awe of you, so thank you. I agree with the corporate ambition point that Councillor Harwood just mentioned. I was happy recently to take a train and see actually on the ticket machine, that's the first thing you see is white ribbon. You know, we're supporters of white ribbon. So I think that's great, and we're starting to see those big national organisations making those steps. It then saddened me. I was thinking back to 1990 when I was a bit of a slip of a lass still, and we achieved equal pay for women. And I worked in the city at the time, and it was a big thing. We all had big hair and big shoulder pads to sort of like force down those barriers. That's 35 years ago. And actually, most households as a result of that now have dual partners who work, and that's for economic reasons. You know, you have to work in order to meet the cost of living. Yet still this remains an issue, and if you can't have parity on the economic basis and, you know, on a work basis to support your household without this, it's just really shocking. And I was just reflecting on my little rural ward when we go through our crime statistics multi-agency. It's always disappointing that violence and sexual crimes or offences are up there in numbers terms as they are with crimes against vehicles and property, you know, lawnmower thefts, etc., etc. So it's an issue. I just have one request in relation to the paper, and it's a bit of a blind spot for me, but I'm really interested in the role that social media plays in either propagating this or the role it could play positively to actually sort of like help change behaviour. So I don't know the answer to that. I'm sort of probably not of an age I'm an expert, but yeah, I thought it was an important consideration to include. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair and members all. It seems to me that what we need to focus on is the collaborations that are at our fingertips. There are, I've just checked again, something like 14 pages of well thought through reasoning, research and suggested ways forward. Those watching this online and remotely and otherwise, I commend the report to you for your wider attention. We can't possibly go over all of those things today. So I just want to draw out a couple of points. One is, when I spoke previously, you'll recall that I drew on my experience as a teacher. I would like to underline the excellent work being done in settings in schools in this day and age. There is very serious effort put into personal health and social education. A great deal of energy is put into pushing teachers forward, folk who are frankly out of their comfort zones in being asked to put before young people the kind of opportunities for moral engagement. across the piece, including in this area. They will be willing and enthusiastic and grateful partners with us in this. There will not be any reluctance on their part. Personal health and social education coordinators will welcome us with open arms if we can offer resources. Adults with good communication skills and the kind of example that Councillor Cleater spoke of as the kinds of people that we would want our young people to be looking up to. The environment inside schools is often more positive than it is on the street. The aspect that strikes me of the 14 pages of good ideas and research that we have in our paper is the conceptuality of the active bystander, of what it is that we do as adults in the street outside. Just as a small point of detail, Councillor English and I did not witness the assault that Councillor Cleater spoke of. Things may have gone differently if in that instance we only arrived after we found the young woman in distress and you were there before either of us were. Of that I'm absolutely sure. You didn't need our help either, as I recall. But extending our reach into what active bystander activity would look like for shopkeepers, staff, professionals in the town, what it is that we do to overcome. Councillor Harwood reflected, as I did, perhaps our experience is not representative, but it is our experience. It seems to us that it is more difficult for adults to intervene in other people's behaviour these days. I recall stern looks being thrown in my direction as a young person that I do not see anywhere on the street. Indeed, without going into the details, the last aggressive action that I witnessed was 2 days ago, where a tradesman was picking up a vehicle from an accident at Willington Street, and the tradesman was the person abusing me. It is across the piece. We can't pretend that it is just one area. I think we all concede that there are many groups of people who are subject to violence and aggression. We are going to keep women and girls front and centre in this consideration while recognising that that is appropriate. So the last thing I want to say is that I welcome that with Officer Woodhouse. We began the Healthy Alliance Partnership recently, where stakeholders were in this room representing many different parts of health activities in the area. I don't think we want to promise how much we will accomplish, but we will be ambitious, and I'm sure officers will be looking for the closest things to our hands to be able to engender those kinds of positive relationships with those who are not in the council, as Councillor Cooch's second question today intimated. We will look for willing partners in those things. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wales.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to praise the work done at Trinity, but not just by Trinity, but the partner organisations who work with them, as a good example of what is currently being done. But sad to say, in a sense, that happens a bit too late. It only happens to put the pieces back together again. It doesn't. It needs more help to prevent these situations from arising in the first place. Sad to say that until society gets it into its head that violence is not the answer, not the way forward for anybody, on anybody, or by anybody, particularly against those less able to defend themselves, then that's where it's got to start. And I echo the calls for more prevention, more work in schools, more work at the very basic level, because most of this is learned behaviour. Young people are not necessarily sort of born violent. These things are learned behaviour from people they see around them, and that's where we need to work more effectively.
Thank you. I've heard a number of points. I think Councillor Greenland's earlier point about risk assessments, I think we need to make sure we take that on board. It'd be useful to understand the impact of social media, external to Maidstone and obviously within Maidstone itself. We've heard about the young people and how we must listen, work with, etc., and the active bystander bits are important. Councillor English made the important point about making sure that the actions we're taking are having an impact. I note recommendation 3 is to bring a report back, which I think Councillor Cleater wanted. Can we make sure wherever possible we are including in that report, is this working, and should we continue, should we do more, etc., or should we change? And on that final point, and this is to everybody, if the stuff that we are missing, we need to hear. If the stuff that can be done that we're not doing, we do need to be told. We are a hive mind. Let's make sure we use all of our understanding, skills, and knowledge. There are 3. I can see no more people indicating there are 3 recommendations. I'm not going to read the recommendations because they go across 4 pages and we'll be here all night. So recommendation 1 is acknowledging the Safer Maidstone Partnership's effort to date. Recommendation 2 is progress the actions within it, and recommendation 3 is progress updates for April. I'm going to propose all of those and the text underneath them for priorities. Councillor English seconded. Thank you. Is that agreed, members? Thank you. And thank you for sharing your evening with us. Thank you. And feel free to stay and join in. Okay, right. Where are we? So I think we're on to item 18, second quarter financial update report. Councillor Cox, would you like to introduce this?
I will. This is going to appear, sort of like quite tame actually in relation to the conversation we've just had. So second quarter financial update, this is as at September 24, halfway through our year. I'm just going to give you a couple of headlines, assuming that Cabinet have had the opportunity to read this. Obviously, we'll take any questions. So from the revenue budget point of view, pages 64 to 74, financial performance shows a projected overspend for the year for the council as a whole of 449,000. And it's an increase from the figure we reported for the end of the first quarter, which was 354,000. There is also a saving of 500,000 arising from lower than projected inflation indices being applied to the waste collection contract costs. So the projected overspends that basically make up the 449, I won't go through them in detail unless you want to pick up on any of them, but they're largely property related, whether that's the project working on the decarbonisation of Maidstone House, the rate at which we have been able to attract rental income under Maidstone Property Holding, residential properties, the rate of taking up leases at Lockmeadow, and also in terms of development management, the number of applications and the rate and the type of which that have been received. And finally, temporary accommodation costs continuing to be higher than we had anticipated. In terms of remedial measures to address those, there are things that we can do through sort of natural resource management and not increasing teams where we've got vacancies that aren't needed. And the position is we hope to be able to rebalance that by the year end. Capital budget, 75 million of the capital budget is projected to slip to 24-25. And in retrospect, the capital budget was over-optimistic given the delays in particular in relation to the planning and development of Maidstone East. Reserves, the decision of the council in February 24, that 5 million is due to be transferred into the Housing Investment Fund this year in order to support the council's social affordable housing programme. And I just really wanted to draw your attention to 2 more points. One is the Treasury management, where we have healthy cash balances, 38 million at the end of that period. And then finally, we've got 1 outstanding rent write-off, which went to the PACS, and that relates to a debt which was office accommodation rent, and where the company concerned has no resources and is likely to be wound up. So we have no remedial activity we can take on that. So recommendations, you're recommended to note the contents of the report. And that's to take the revenue position as at the end of Q2, the capital position as at the end of Q2 for 24-25 also be noted, and that the uncollectible property rent will be approved for write-off. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Mr. Green, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
I've nothing to add to that.
Thank you. Any comments from members? No. I think we're noting this report, aren't we? Oh, and in terms of the write-off, do we? Can I see a proposer to approve the write-off? I'll propose to. If somebody would second it, is that agreed? Excellent. Thank you. Right, item 19, half-yearly KPI report. Councillor Cox, you're on the stage again.
Thank you. So if we talk about half-yearly performance, I think of this as a KPI report. So this KPI performance position sets out 24-25 for the first half of the year, April to September. It only this report only features KPIs which fall under the remit, I believe, of the CTCES committee. In terms of content of the 28 KPIs falling under that pack, 10 had a half-yearly target assigned to them, 30% of which had met their targets in the first half of the year. Of the 7 that missed their targets, 3 of them were really just rounding errors, and there are 4 that were missed by more than 10%. And those relate, I won't come as a surprise to you, to the waste collection service at the start of the year, with the challenges encountered there. Yeah, and that was particularly in terms of missed bin collections and the percentage of freedom of information requests responded to on time. Litter and detritus levels were another one that missed, and the lower payment rate of fixed penalty notices worsening due to the many requests for payment extensions by those receiving the fines. And that one, I think, is one that we will need to put a bit of attention to make sure it doesn't become a repeat pattern. So you are requested to consider the following recommendations: that you note the positions as at the first half of 24-25, including any actions being taken or proposed to improve the positions, to consider any additional recommendations, of which I don't think there are any unless we've got some here, which the Cabinet finds appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs Woodhouse, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, thank you, Leader. Councillor Cox has covered it very well.
Thank you. Just in terms of the waste collection performance for Q1, it is clearly wrong. The numbers are clearly wrong. I suspect I know why they're wrong, and I have proposed that we check the data source, and as we have very accurate data coming through a different route, so I think the performance was in excess of 5% bins missing, if I remember Q1, which I do very, very well. William. Yes, would you like to admit?
Yes, thank you. I think in the report the numbers quoted are sort of, they're not percentages. So the target is 80 missed bins per 100,000, and the report, does show that target was missed. Was it 660? 690.
Yeah.
So
so I think you'll find 690 as a percentage of 100,000 is 0.67%.
Yes, and then it goes on in the report, and it does talks about the methodology, but it does say that the figure was around 80%, because they weren't able to capture the data accurately.
Thank you. Yeah, no, and I think that's the key point. We have now got accurate data coming through, so it would be making. I think it's incumbent on us to make sure that the metric and the metadata that sits behind this reflects that good data we're getting from Suez. Yeah. Thank you. I think we're just noting this report, aren't we? I can't see any other actions. So is this? Oh, the final thing, and I can't remember if you said this. We obviously looking at the KPIs in relation to the new corporate strategy and how that pans out. And hopefully, should that corporate strategy be approved, we can see reports coming through with our corporate priorities. Good. Is this report noted, members? Thank you. Right. Item 20, Councillor Cox. It's all you, isn't it? A discretionary rates relief policy. Would you like to introduce this one, please?
December is the month I live for. So I'm just going to give a very, very quick overview on this. And if there are any questions, we have Zoe Kent here, the officer who's responsible to, and obviously a subject matter expert, to answer those. So first of all, I'd start with a big thank you to the officers, and I should have said the same to Mark's team for and Anna's team for sort of both the KPIs and the second quarter forecast. So thank you, Zoe, and your team for the consultation and also the policy update. It's a substantial piece of work to go through. So the consultation was out for 6 weeks from mid-September, and 45 organisations or people responded. This paper was taken through the Climate Transition Corporate and Environmental Services Pack, where it was noted, and also the Oversight and Scrutiny Committee, where the policy was adopted. I think that it's probably, rather than going into a lot of detail, the main thing to sort of note here is, first of all, there have been some sort of definitional changes, making sure that community association sport clubs are defined to include not just under the banner of non-profit making organisations, to specifically cite charitable incorporated organisations and community interest companies, so they're specific, rather explicit rather than implied. What else was I going to say very quickly? There have been some changes to the policy as a result of those. And while we've tried as far as possible for this to be explicit in many cases, I think it's also important to recognise that very often we're dealing with sort of like judgmental situations that benefit from judgmental analysis and decision making. And so there's an element of delegated responsibility or delegated authority in the application of this policy to Zoe and her team. So I'll probably leave it there and just take any questions.
Thank you. Before we come to questions, Councillor Cooling, would you like? You've indicated you'd like to speak on this item. Would you like to?
Yes, I'm hoping you can hear me okay.
We can hear you.
Okay. My apologies. This statement varies considerably from that email to you following email exchanges with Councillor Cox that you were copied on, but quite understandably will probably not have had time to read. The preferred option in your cabinet paper is the originally drafted policy with a few amendments following consultation, but does not address concerns about treatment of community interest companies, CICs, and the application process. The draft policy automatically grants registered charities minimum 80% relief, plus discretionary relief perhaps to 100%. CICs were introduced in 2005 under the Companies Act 2004. While being a company, there are statutory provisions to ensure it is working for community benefit. Besides accounts, a CIC has to file an annual report to show continuing community benefit. CICs are overseen by the regulator of community interest companies. However, the draft policy gives them no minimum level of relief, having to rely wholly on discretionary top-up. A small, modest charity does not have more complicated reporting than CICs. Charity Commission scrutiny is not annual and is perhaps vanishingly small. HMRC only gets involved if gift aid arrangements are sought. CICs have to prepare proper company accounts for Companies House and HMRC, and also annually provide a completed CIC 34 form for their regulator to demonstrate continuing community benefit. CICs could pay directors, but that and dividends can be, and for us, are clearly disowned and would be easily checked by MPC for other CICs. A registered charity deserves as much or as little scrutiny as a CIC, but the draft policy grants registered charities 80% minimum relief while leaving CICs fully to the discretion of officers. We ask, please, that you require CICs to be given the exact same treatment as registered charities so that minimum 80% relief can be relied upon and planned for. As for administration, the draft requires even registered charities to engage in an onerous 3-yearly cycle of administration, whereas in our experience of 15 to 20 years or more, there has not been an application process, but we do understand that MPC must now react to the new audit requirement. But surely the renewal process for at least an existing beneficiary could be made relatively painless, whereas paragraph 3 of the revised draft remains onerous and not simple. It has been suggested by others that where there has been no change for better or worse in the current beneficiary circumstances, a simple declaration to that effect should be the only requirement. In summary, please require CICs to be placed on the exact same footing as registered charities for 80% minimum relief. And secondly, please require a very much simplified renewal process for existing beneficiaries. Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you, Councillor Cooling. Mrs. Kent, is there anything you'd like to add, or if you wanted to respond to Councillor Cooling's points, you're very welcome to as well.
Thank you, Chair. Part 4 of the policy covers charitable relief, which is covered by legislation, and that is refunded to us by the government, and we award 80% for that. Some charities then claim discretionary relief, a lot don't. Part 5 of the policy covers sports clubs, and that is 80% relief. That's mandatory, and we get that money back from the government. Discretionary relief we can award to any organisations up to 100%. That is within the policy that we decide how we're going to award it. If we awarded 80% to all CICs, that would mean it would be open to any CICs within the country that had a business within the Maidstone area to claim it, and we would have to award 80%. By following the policy is designed so that we're supporting local organisations that bring something to the local area, and so that it's local charities that are supported. We've had questions before about the budget and how much funding we have for this. That is down to the amount of applications we receive, and that goes up and down over the years, depending who's claiming. As for the application form and the process, it's a 2-page form with a lot of yes and no answers. It isn't, shouldn't take a lot of effort to complete it. If there's non-profit making organisations that haven't completed a form in the past, that's probably because they claimed years and years ago. But as has been mentioned, we have been audited and we've been told that we should have an application process in place. It's also good management for us to look at the resources of a non-profit making organisation in case they have got quite a lot of funds. So that's why we'd look at it, but we don't need a full set of accounts if they haven't got a large amount of income. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Kent. Any comments from members? Okay, we have a recommendation to adopt this policy after making changes as suggested in Appendix 5. I'm happy to propose that from the chair. Would somebody like to second it? Councillor English, your hand goes up so quickly. So, members, is that agreed? Thank you. Item 21. Now, I can't remember who's proposing this, introducing this one. Councillor Cox.
Right, last time you'll hear from me, I promise. So this is the review of fees and charges for year 25-26, the forthcoming budget year. Just a couple of principles to remind us all of, I'm sure you're all aware. So first of all, the charging policy states we need to be fair, transparent, and this policy needs to be understandable. That it applies to discretionary services as opposed to statutory, which are set by the government. And the key principle in my view is that service users make a direct contribution to the cost of the service they're using. So there's no cross subsidy of, for example, drivers and people parking their cars not being cross subsidised by people who rely on the buses, for example. Also, overarching principle that there's a cost to the council of providing these services, and the costs continue to increase either just from a business as usual perspective, or as we're looking to, or we have delivered improvement. So a couple of bits I just wanted to mention. This isn't all about cost increases, there are reductions as well, and one of the ones that we were particularly keen to provide for town centre residents were a 50% reduction in off-street parking for the evenings and overnight. That makes it easier for residents to park near where they live. In terms of other points to note, this is the first increase that's happened in, I believe, the last 5 years. And if we were, particularly in relation to parking, I'm sorry, if we were to annualise just the sort of either whether we do it on a consumer price index or retail price index basis, the charges that would have been applied according to those by now would be close to 25% if they were compounded. Have I got anything else to say? I think the final thing to say is where there are certain enforcement charges, and we were asked the question by a councillor colleague whether or not we have those charges at the max, which whether they're waste crime or PCNs or parking fines, and the answer is yes, because those are set at statutory level. So I think that's probably it for me in terms of introduction. In terms of recommendations, we ask that the report be noted, but you may choose to comment on. The fees and charges are set out in appendices A, C and D, which are the spreadsheet inputs to the overall figures here. The policy, appendix B, to be noted, and the budget survey results in appendices E and F also be noted. That was the resident survey. Thank you.
Councillor Cox. Mr. Green, is there anything you'd like to add?
Nothing to add, thank you.
Thank you. Before I come to you, Councillor English, I just wanted to say I'm personally pleased that we are starting to address the balance, the longer term, what's the word, subsidisation of parking has meant reduced money for other public services. So I'm glad we're starting to redress that balance. Councillor English.
We as an administration have given, and officers have given, a great deal of time and consideration to the fees and charges, both in terms of the fairness and equity of the individual fees and charges, which has led us to the point that Councillor Cox makes about town centre parking for residents in the evening, where we feel that as a council, it's only fair that if we're going to encourage town centre residents, that we actually enable them to live their lives in a manner which is reasonably appropriate. So these fees and charges are both appropriate for the particular services, and as far as possible, we've tried to look at some wider social, economic and philosophical objectives, but it's a very early days, obviously. I mean, this is the first set of fees and charges that we have. Hopefully over time we can develop the theme and people will see that there is a logic at various levels to these fees and charges, and it's not just trying to extract the maximum amount of money for in a cash cow sort of way, but there are actually wider objectives here that are at work. So I think obviously there will be further comments as these things work their way through the council's processes. It may be that we haven't thought of exactly everything, and that's why we have such wide consultative processes within the council, and there may well be good ideas that we haven't yet thought of. But as it stands at the moment, I'm happy to support the recommendations.
Thank you. Okay, I can't see any more hands going up. So there are 4 recommendations. Firstly, do we note the contents of the report? Secondly, that the fees and charges as detailed in appendices A, C and D be approved. Are they approved? Fees and charges policy in B, is that noted? And the budget survey results as detailed in appendices E and F, are they noted? Excellent, thank you. Okay, agenda item 22. Councillor Cox, no, Councillor Wales.
Councillor Cox is very welcome to speak on this if she wishes. So the housing allocation scheme review. A review of the council's housing allocation scheme takes place periodically to keep us up to date with government recommendations and to ensure that the scheme is working as intended. That is, to ensure that those most in need of housing are included and have a realistic chance of receiving an offer. There's little point in adding more and more people to a list when the stock of homes is not increasing sufficiently fast, despite our best efforts. The recommended proposals are listed out in sections 3.1 to 3.22, and the suggested amendments from the Housing and Community Cohesion PAC and the Overview and Scrutiny Committee are in 6.4 and 6.5 respectively. The definition of family has been amended to include looked after children, but we are awaiting further guidance from the government on care leavers. Every housing association with whom we have nomination rights will be invited to comment on the changes, and the final amended scheme will be issued to all relevant stakeholders and will be published on the council's website. I believe option A, with the addition of the amended definition of family, offers the best way forward to ensure that those placed in temporary accommodation are prioritised for social housing, thereby reducing the cost of temporary accommodation, which we have seen earlier is constantly increasing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wales. There was just in terms of the PAC discussion, are you able to say just a little bit more about the proposals and your thoughts on them? That would be helpful, I think.
The PAC discussion, much the same as overview and scrutiny, were about restoring or retaining the connection of the local criteria connection as per the current policy. We've moved in line with lots of other local boroughs to restrict that in order that we can, say, prioritise those on the temporary accommodation list and get them out of that temporary accommodation and into a decent home. If we were able to build homes much faster, then we would have far more homes to move everybody into, but sadly that's not the case. We are proceeding as fast as we can with that, but the priority has to be to get people out of that temporary accommodation sausage machine faster. But also, I think, to not engender false hope in people that getting on the list will mean they will get a property, because if the list gets bigger, we operate a closed list here, so you have to have criteria to get onto it. Other boroughs that have an open list with thousands and thousands of people on just absolutely give no chance to anybody of getting off. Well, very few people obviously get top of the end of this get off, but a lot of people that sit on the bottom of that list forever. If we have a smaller list, then the people there do have some hope that they will actually reach the top of it and get a property. It doesn't guarantee a property, obviously, being on the list, and all we are doing is adjusting the criteria of who goes on the list. Once this is, whatever amendment, whatever policy is agreed tonight, it will go to the housing associations that we deal with, because they will then have to adopt it and take it into their policies. So it's by no means guaranteed that it will actually happen anyway. One of the things that is in there is a situation that has arisen where larger families who are entitled or who are entitled to a larger property, of which there are far fewer, are unable to bid on a smaller home, which they would be perfectly happy with. And that strikes me as being somewhat bizarre, in that if they would be perfectly happy to it, why can they not go into a 3-bedroom home simply because there aren't any 4-bedroom homes to bid on? So I think that's another area that's we've addressed, along with a couple of other sort of tweaks of that nature in the policy.
Thank you. Mr. Corner, is there anything you'd like to add? Okay, anybody would like to make any comments? Councillor Harwood?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm willing to second the motion to approve this because I think it does actually streamline some processes. And as a councillor for a ward with a significant amount of affordable housing within it, I think we really do need to oil the wheels in some way, and the officer advice, which I take on board, is that the changes proposed will do just that.
Thank you. So in terms of the proposal, that this is to accept the recommend option A, points 32 to 322. Yes. Okay, well, it's been proposed and seconded. Are we agreed? Thank you. Item 23, landscape character assessment and supplementary planning document. Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chair. Anna and Rob are here who can introduce and ask any questions, but I think the critical point here is that our current landscape character assessment supplement, it's getting quite dated. It's a 2012 document, but actually some of it is even older than that, was carried forward to the 2012 iteration. And the local plan review has moved the goalposts a little bit in that it has created a higher bar for planning, for the planning authority to prove harm to the landscape. So we really do need to update our supplementary planning document to ensure us to optimise landscape protection. As you can see from the report, we are seeking a real kind of step change in terms of the document, where we're not looking anymore to kind of set in aspic the landscape as it currently is, with all of the damage that has accrued over the last decades and indeed millennia, but we're looking to restore our landscape, and it brings in new concepts, things like potential natural vegetation and so on, which was not really around in 2012. So it will be a really useful document and help us in future appeals and so on. Just as a postscript, linking into the point that you raised on the previous item, Chair, around discussion at the Policy Advisory Committee, the relevant Policy Advisory Committee expressed a willingness and indeed a wish to support the process of this document as best they can and to be involved as much as they can. We're cognizant of that, but for obvious reasons that we are running out of road as a local authority and we need to get this document over the line. So I am therefore keen that we crack on and that officers take the opportunity to raise in informal ways with relevant groups and discussions with the Policy Advisory Committee and indeed all members as we're on the journey, rather than interrupt the process, because I think we've got to move on this. So therefore I would move that we accept both recommendation 1 and 2 on page 302 and essentially get on with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harwood. And almost as soon as you said move, it was the trigger for Councillor English's hand to dive up and second it, I'm assuming. Before I bring you in, Mrs. Stevens, did you want to add anything?
I think Councillor Harwood has covered most of what I was going to say. So the only thing I was going to add on from those things really is that stakeholder engagement will be a key part of the development of both the landscape character assessment evidence document, that's subject of recommendation 1, and the policy SPD subject of recommendation 2, and that voluntary statutory academic bodies and local people and landowners will be engaged throughout the process. Since the report was published, this report, a new NPPF National Planning Policy Framework has been released. So just to confirm that all the paragraphs referenced on page 305 under the heading National Policy Context for Landscape Assessment are still in the new NPPF, I have checked, but some of the paragraph numbers have changed. But the wording is still, all of the wording of all of those paragraphs is still in there under a paragraph number. And just to emphasise a point that Councillor Harwood did make, that the current landscape character assessment does not recognise valued landscapes and particularly settlement openness or morphology, and this has resulted in a lack of evidence to be able to support the protection of our valuable landscape features at planning appeal, and this has had a subsequent impact from the loss of planning appeals on costs and reputation. So due to significant changes from legislation and guidance and within the landscapes of the borough, we would suggest that the current LCA is updated.
Thank you. And Mr. Jarman, do you want to speak?
We draw the boundary and base there's a gap. As it and I think facts I don't think it's significant. Ironically, I say ironically, good in terms of pending extensions. But we communicate in because I see this.
Thank you. It's been proposed and seconded. Councillor Summersgill, you want to speak? Oh, sorry. Councillor English first, then.
Sorry to delay you, Councillor Summersgill. I won't take long. All I will say is that having sat on planning committee until relatively recently, it was quite obvious that the effectiveness of the previous document was tailing off dramatically. It had never been quite as effective as it should have been, but it was tailing off quite dramatically. So action is needed. And there was action needed across a number of planning policies, but if we had to pick one that's been causing immediate problems for the authority then we need to address, then this is it. So I support the recommendations.
Thank you. And Councillor Summersgill.
Sorry, just wanted to clarify the point that the local plan review introduced significant wording, but significant and rural are both underlined. Was rural also introduced in the local plan review, or is that underlined for a different reason? And if it was in the review, can you explain where rural is defined?
Would somebody like to answer that question?
I can confirm that rural was added into the policy wording. I'm not sure where that word came from.
Okay, we probably need to take that offline. Doesn't look like we've got a specific answer in the room, so perhaps we can pick that up after the meeting.
Yes, thank you for the clarification, though there was 2 words added, not just significant. Thank you.
Good. Okay. So we have 2 recommendations. Recommendation 1 is around the qualified consultant. Recommendation 2 is the writing a new SPD. They've been proposed and seconded. Are we agreed? Excellent. I think final item, the future of sustainability of community larders will be introduced by Councillor Nagy. Councillor Cleater has indicated she would possibly like to speak, so I will offer her that. As noted at the start, if people want to go into stuff in the yellow papers, then we may need to go into a closed session. I would rather like to avoid that if we can. I'd rather like to keep conversations out in the open as much as possible. Councillor Nagy.
I read this first. Thank you, Chairman. This evening's report is to consider the options for the decision for the future sustainability of the community larders. Maidstone Borough Council began work in 2021 to address health inequalities in most deprived communities. Through this work, it was identified that food insecurity was one of the biggest concerns for residents. Grant funding was secured from the West Kent Health and Care Partnership Health Inequalities Programme, and the Shetway Community Larder opened in December 2022. This was followed by Parkwood Larder in July 2023. In September 2023, a third community larder was opened at Trinity, utilising government funding from the Household Support Fund. The larders were designed to provide a long-term, sustainable approach to addressing food insecurity and to contribute positively to reducing health inequalities. The wider benefits of the larders have been to reduce food waste and to provide opportunities for volunteering. Making the larders sustainable has been a priority of the project. A one-off sum was allocated for this purpose in the 2024 to 2025 budget. As detailed in the report, a supplier engagement was conducted, seeking expressions of interest from local charities and community interested companies. Unfortunately, the 2 organisations who showed an interest at stage 1 in the procurement process withdrew from the process. The council investigated other possible options. We were introduced to the Bread and Butter Thing, an organisation with established close links with supermarkets, factories and farms to secure and redistribute surplus food that often ends up going to waste because it's wrongly labelled or there's too much of it. In March 2024, the council sought authorisation to single source the Bread and Butter Thing to run the Maidstone Community Larders. We delayed moving forward with the Bread and Butter Thing because a local organisation approached the council when they were interested in the community larders. However, they also withdrew their offer. This leaves us with 3 options: close the larders, work with the Bread and Butter Thing, or to deliver the larders in-house, which is not currently budgeted for. Grant funding has ended, but there is enough money remaining for the larders to continue until the end of the financial year. The report and its recommendations were considered by the Housing and Community Cohesion Policy Advisory Committee on Tuesday the 10th of December and the Overview and Scrutiny Committee on Wednesday the 11th of December. Both committees agreed the recommendations to Cabinet as set out in the report. The Housing and Community Cohesion Policy Advisory Committee caveated that this was consideration of the committee's comments. As this discussion took place in part 2, these comments cannot be discussed further. Should Cabinet move to part 2 for this item, they can be discussed. Thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Councillor Nagy. Councillor Cleater, did you want to speak on this item?
I won't take much of your time, but as Councillor Nagy indicated, there were some issues raised in the exempt areas, which the PAC committee asked for. It's not, I can say something because it's not this confidential, it was just to have the provider actually meet, whether online, with the committee or not, to get to know who they are, what they do. My only other thing I will say is around affordability, and I will leave it at that. That was in the exempt bit as well, and that was discussed at the PAC committee as well. So in terms of the points raised, the rest that was discussed fully, I believe, at overview and scrutiny and at the HCC PAC, the issues were raised, they were discussed, and I'm hoping that if you do go into exempt or whatever, that they are discussed fully. I think it's a shame that the NHS pulled the funding, but I think what I would say is that whatever happens, it's about when people use these community larders, whether they're in Maidstone or whether they're anywhere else in the country, is actually that they're given choice, and we don't take a retrograde step of making it look like a food bank where you get what you're given. And that's the only point I would make, that I need to make, because the relevance issues can be discussed on exempt. And I will leave you all to a very good evening, because I've got to go home and cook the tea.
Thanks, Maureen. Ms. Sweeney, is there anything you'd like to add at this point?
No, I don't think so, Chairman. I think it's been fully discussed at the PAC and at overview and scrutiny, but if there's any points of clarification on the papers, then I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you. Councillor Nagy.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to say all the concerns that we discussed at the two meetings were noted and will be part of where we go in the future. So we know what the committees were saying and it's been noted. Thank you.
Thank you. That's really helpful, Councillor Nagy. Councillor Wales.
Having been at the Trinity food larder on one occasion at least, I was impressed with the way that it was more like people shopping in a supermarket than queuing up for handouts, in that they did have choice. They had a certain number of coupons, whatever, and they could go and choose the items that matched those number of points that they had on their coupons. I feel it's a bit of a retrograde step to go back to people taking what they're given, which makes it feel far more like charity, people being singled out who have fallen on hard times for no fault of their own, unable to perform the task of looking after their family in the way that they used to be able to. And I think the food larders, the way they're currently set up, give people that element of choice over their own lives, small though it may be. And I appreciate the fact that, yes, and the question of affordability too, but I won't go into the details, but I would support Councillor Cleater on that. But if we can have talked to the bread and butter thing and find out why they feel it necessary just to give people what they decide, then we may be able to move forward a bit more easily on it.
Thank you. Any other comments from members? I think that's all. Councillor Thompson.
I hope that's not a disappointment, Mr. Chairman.
I'm thoroughly disappointed in you not jumping in first.
I would like to make some remarks to acknowledge the depth of expertise, thought and care that has gone into the report. I think we need to take some time to appreciate what it represents. We have thought about in our corporate strategy how the economy does not do what it should do to look after our communities. The economy is broken in various ways. My responsibility for economic development must surely reach for a model that looks out for the underprivileged and the vulnerable. This programme absolutely addresses that head on. It is nice to see the cross-cutting issues at the start of this report that really do the useful things that we have been hankering for some months, if not longer. It makes instructive reading as to how the cross-cutting issues do in fact address the priorities of our corporate strategy. It doesn't simply help people who don't have enough money to buy food. It puts healthier menus on families' tables. It meets the needs of children who aren't able to study properly at school because they're not fed properly. It addresses social mobility. In the process, it socialises the volunteers and brings them into the community networks with the people that they're meeting in their local neighbourhoods. We're considering the difficulty of this particular proposal because the organisation is headquartered some distance from here, but they bring local know-how. They have a meaningful ethos addressing assisting people in routes out of poverty and creating resilient communities. This is a good partner from whom we will learn lessons and perhaps see a good example of a more local economy that is better connected, that in some ways is more circular than is otherwise the case, even including the avoiding waste, as has been pointed out. I mentioned the Healthy Alliance Partnership earlier under Angela Woodhouse's leadership. Earlier, we must note the breakdown of the link with the West Kent Healthcare Partnership and the Household Support Fund, and also the support for diabetes and nutrition support from West Kent GP Federation. These are not going to help us address health inequalities, they're rather going to widen. But we can readdress our efforts in these respects. We have talked ambitiously about donut economics, of meeting the needs of society and living within the provisions of the planet. This is what we are aiming for when we talk about turning around financial exclusion to an inclusive model. As members have said already this evening, the council has already done good work. The research done in the setting up of Active Mob need not be lost from the council's expertise. As this council, Councillor Harwood used an interesting metaphor earlier, which I won't repeat. This council expects a reorganisation of some sort, but the sustainability of the local economy and robust policy and procedures for supporting the most disadvantaged people is what we've set out to do. It must be front and centre of what we are about, and I very much hope that this present grant proposal does bear the fruit that we hope that it does, and indeed that we build into it a policy and procedure that outlasts whatever may happen at this place. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor English.
Yes, yes, it's sometimes said that the perfect is the enemy of the good, and I think we might be in that situation to a large extent. It's a pity that we ended up in a situation where some funding has been axed and bidders have withdrawn. So we find ourselves having moved in the way we wouldn't necessarily have chosen. So, but we do have fairly stark options, really. We pull the plug on community lives and leave people with a very difficult life, an even more difficult life, which is not something I think we should be doing as human beings, let alone councillors. We go with this option, or we try and set up our own in-house service. Well, if I think it might take us some time, at the very least, and some money to actually set up an in-house service. I'm not sure how immediately that could be done, but there are quite a lot of risks with that, even if it can be done quite quickly. I think it is generally a good idea in local government, well, in most organisations, to actually cooperate with an established provider who has some knowledge of what they are trying to do. I would like to hope that if we can build a relationship, we might be able to influence the organisation to be a little more flexible and as they develop in their Maidstone offer. I think then we should be doing that if we can, but I do feel at this stage that we need to take a positive decision to engage with the bread and butter thing and to develop a service that for our residents who need it. And it's not, there are things I think we could, in an ideal world, do better in terms of freedom of choice and so forth. But we are not in an ideal world.
Thank you, Councillor English. You've said all I was going to say, and I'm assuming with that speech you are seconding Councillor Nagy's proposal to do this. Yes, I just thought I'd throw that in there before you got your hand up. Councillor Cox, and then Councillor Summerskill.
Just very quickly, one of the things I really like about this scheme is its own supply chain, that it's actually using excess produce and products from supermarkets. And I think what that does in turn is should introduce a much wider range of variety of items that are available within those bags. The bags aren't, basically you can't choose. I think it should be the opposite, that actually you've got more choice in there inherently because they're coming from sources that actually have a much broader set of products themselves. And I think it also, by virtue of that, it should reduce the amount of food waste going to landfills, etc., as well from those suppliers. So I'm in favour.
Thank you. Councillor Summerskill.
Just to note, the next cabinet meeting will be considering a motion on Kent farmers and growers and the wider Maidstone food and drink industry. And so I'll hope that we are including consideration of that in this item. And as you know, we have farmers in Marden who are donating their apples to school children in London at the moment. And we should be piggybacking on some of that, perhaps.
Thank you. And Councillor Wales.
Yes, I agree. It makes sense to use local produce. To be fair, the current larders do take waste produce from supermarkets. I know from my own experience, they actually take some from where my husband works at Lewes Road in Tesco's. So they do that. So that's nothing new. Another issue to take it on board is that if a bag is a set number of things, we need to be sort of culturally aware that certain people won't be able to have certain things in those bags and they won't be able to eat them. So do we have different coloured bags for different people and what they might be able to take, or dietary requirements where they can't eat certain foods, if they're lactose intolerant or whatever, gluten intolerant? It's much easier if you give people the choice not to have those things in their bags in the first place.
Thank you. I think Mrs. Woodhouse wanted to go. Mrs. Broom.
So 2 points to make, really. First, to reiterate, I think what Councillor English said about perfection being the enemy of progress. So we do understand that there may be particular models that might be more perfect than the one that is available here, but this is the one that's available. I visited along with Orla the operation that the Bread and Butter thing do on a day-to-day basis. And while the choices related to individual dietary requirements were not infinite, they do have information about the people who are registered and who each week notify them that they need to have access to the food larder. And that allows the preparation of particular types of food to suit the needs of those individuals. So there is some degree of flexibility there. I'm sure it's not as infinite as you've described it. So I think, as with many things, we're walking quite a difficult tightrope here between what the art of the possible is and making that as close to what everybody wants to see as possible. Somebody made a reference earlier, I think it was Councillor Thompson, to the values and the ethos of this particular provider. I'm sure the proof of the pudding will be in the eating when we work with them, if that's indeed what we do. Yes, I know it was a bit of a pun. It was entirely unintended, but it's must have got in my brain somewhere. I do think that there was the opportunity to work with them as they do other innovations as well. So being a fairly large organisation, they're working with a whole range of different organisations and funders in order to develop the offer. So I'm sure a lot of the ideas that you've outlined are things that we can promote and progress when the opportunity arises.
Thank you. Okay, we have the recommendation for the one-off investment in the bread and butter thing to be agreed as per section 4. It's been seconded by Councillor English. Are we agreed? Thank you. I now declare this meeting closed. Thank you, everybody.